Good morning, everybody. Good morning to all of us, all of you tuning in from Asia. Good evening to all of our folks and friends who are tuning in from North America. And to everyone else, please welcome to the launch of SGInnovate's Deep Tech for Good initiative. My name is Ziki, and I lead the brand and community team here at SGInnovate. We're extremely proud to be launching this very important initiative today, and very happy to have some of our partners with us as well. Through this Deep Tech for Good initiative, and together with our partners, what we want to do is to bring together players from across the deep tech ecosystem to collaborate, build, and scale deep tech solutions for economic and social good. We think that this is very timely with all that's going on around us today. And before we actually get into the event proper, I would like to call on SGInnovate's CEO, Dr. Lim Jui, to please say a few words. Jui?
Okay, thank you, Ziki, and welcome everyone. And thank you for taking the time off your very busy schedules to join us at the launch of the Deep Tech for Good initiative. My name is Jui, and I'm the CEO of SGInnovate. For those of you who are not familiar with SGInnovate, SGInnovate was created about 4 years ago around the belief that the most vexing problems that prevent our world from becoming a better place can and will be solved by the responsible and systematic application of deep science and technology. Our mission is therefore to create high value and impact scientifically, economically, and socially using a three-pronged approach of talent development, community building, and venture investment. Now, today's launch is the culmination of a year's work with all of our partners, whom I will introduce in just a bit. And with the benefit of hindsight and in the light of the current COVID-19 pandemic, this is an effort that has proved to be prescient. I should add that this prescience is not mine because I only joined 2 months ago, but that of our partners and our merry band of community builders led by Ziki and Tuan. Now, this was an effort that was prescient because in the mad rush to publication and valuation in the pre-COVID environment, it was easy for scientists and scientific entrepreneurs to lose sight of science's higher calling. For better or worse, COVID-19 has changed all that. Whether it's technologies that enable us to communicate or learn or transact remotely, to global collaborations aimed at delivering better diagnostics and therapeutics in the fight against the virus. Deep thought and deep science leading to deep technology and empowered by deep relationships are showing the way forward for all of us as a global community. The Deep Tech for Good initiative is a reaffirmation of the power of deep tech and our responsibility to use it for good worthy causes. Access to healthcare, clean water, good nutrition, affordable housing, better education, better opportunity in general. These are aspirations that are shared by all of our partners today. And it is with great honor that, please allow me to introduce our partners to you. We have the UNDP Global Center for Technology, Innovation, and Sustainable Development, represented by Bradley Bucedo. We have the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, led by Jonathan Wong. We have the NTU Institute for Science and Technology for Humanity, represented by Professor Vanessa Evers. We have the X Prize Foundation, represented by Mr. Amir Banifatemi. We have Salesforce, represented today by Cecily Ng, who is the General Manager for Singapore and Area Vice President. And not present today, but fondly remembered, are A-Start Central, which is part of the Agency for Science, Technology and Research, and Element AI. Yeah, we hope the launch of this initiative will pave the way for others in the innovation ecosystem globally to join us to address some of these challenges. And with that, I thank you once again, and I would like to pass the stage back to Ziki, who will introduce, who will then show us a pre-recorded video by Professor Subra Suresh, who is the president of the Nanyang Technological University and my former boss. So on that note, thank you once again. Ziki, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Dewey. And we waited for you actually to launch this very important initiative. We only planned it for a year, so we thank our partners for their patience, and we're very excited today. One of the partners is NTU, and Professor Subra Suresh, who is the president of the Nanyang Technological University, wanted to be here today, but unfortunately could not. So we have a pre-recorded message that we would like to share with you right now.
I don't think there is anything that cannot be solved when it is based on deep thought, deep science, leading to deep technologies, and powered by deep and meaningful relationships. And that is what SGInnovate aspires to do.
Private sector collaborations are absolutely vital. It's the entrepreneurialism, the connection with communities, and the energy, creativity is going to really drive so many of the solutions for humanity, especially the SDGs. AI is already helping create radical changes to so many aspects of life. I think about what we can do with AI in rural parts of Africa to help power telemedicine, for example. And so I'm super excited about this initiative, Deep Tech for Good, to help bring, maybe for the first time, this concerted effort of some of the leading players in the world in deep tech to the biggest problems in the world, and it's exciting.
Ethical AI is a mindset and not a checklist. AI should be in service of human and not the other way around. One of the biggest concerns in AI is how to manage bias. And the way to manage bias, we need to treat it as a human issue and not a tech issue. We don't live in a fair and unbiased world, so we need to manually take diversity into account as we build these into the AI. And the more transparent we make our AI systems, the better and more trusted it will be.
The COVID-19 pandemic has posed serious challenges to both humanity and technology. For example, the restrictions imposed on movement and social gathering so as to contain the spread of the virus have led to significant economic consequences for individuals and organizations. Those who are older, less educated, financially not well off, and with limited access to technology have been hit the hardest. But we are also witnessing a remarkable wave of innovative, compassionate, and energetic responses by the public and by private sectors, and by individuals and communities. These responses demonstrate the fundamental resilience and dynamism of human society. It is now more important than ever for universities, government, and industry to work closely together for the benefit of society, to strengthen the global economy, and to advance science and technology through collaborative research and innovation. As technology continues to advance rapidly, we must also respond to the challenges arising from technology in an integrated and interdisciplinary way. For example, some of the key challenges arising from deep tech are the ethical issues related to AI or artificial intelligence technologies, especially data-driven decision-making algorithms that have been criticized for their potential to contribute to and to exacerbate human bias and discrimination, and for lacking in transparency and accountability. To ensure that new AI technologies respect our fundamental human values and rules, we must mobilize scientists, government, industry, civil society, and the public to address the ethical challenges posed by deep tech.
And before we start the panel discussion, I'd like to highlight some of the activities SGInnovate together with our partners will be organizing as part of the Deep Tech for Good initiative. Do you want to show the slide, Wayman? Well, first of all, as the slide's coming on, we've got the Deep Tech for Society Insights paper, which will be launching sometime around July. And this is through interviews with experts from across the science and technology domain, innovation. This paper is really targeted to be released in July, and we hope to be getting some great insights on that as well. We've got an innovation challenge that we're working with the UNDP Global Center for Technology, and we're looking to look at running an innovation challenge sometime in Q4 of this year. So as we're planning that and ironing out some details, this will come to you once it's all finalized and will be announced shortly. We've got also some of the programs that we have in-house in SGInnovate. What's important as we talk about building deep tech for good programs is to build the talent around deep tech. And we've got some programs through our summation program and also the Infinity program, where we have apprenticeships opportunities for undergrads as to join some exciting deep tech startups. And some other virtual events that we're holding as well with our partners. Thank you to the to Element AI that we're going to be bringing in Joshua together with Dr. Lee Kai-Fu. I think this is going to be a big headliner event, and the registration will be going up after this event, so please do sign up for them. And some of the events that we are also doing together with our partners from Salesforce and also A-Star. We are excited to be holding that as a part of the Deep Tech for Good initiative. And with that, I would like to thank my esteemed panelists here. We want to be discussing about partnership with the future as part of the launch of our initiative here today. We have an impressive panel, and before we get into the discussion, I'd like to ask each of them to share with us a little bit about themselves. First, may I ask Jonathan, who is the Chief of Technology and Innovation at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, to please introduce yourself.
Hi there, thank you very much. My name is Jonathan Wong. I'm the Chief of Technology Innovation at the United Nations Commission for Asia and the Pacific. For those of you, I know there are many corporates in the crowd. I always say companies have shareholders. I unfortunately or fortunately have governments. And to that end, we work with 62 governments across the Asia Pacific region, where my role is to advise them on technology innovation policy and increasingly to align them towards the SDGs and some more inclusive dimensions as well. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Amir, who's the Chief of Innovation and Growth from the X Prize Foundation, also one of our strategic partners. Amir, please.
Thank you very much, Zeki. It's wonderful to be here. My role as X Prize is to help launch our global initiatives on AI for good, mostly. And as an introduction to what we are doing right now to address the global challenge on pandemic, we have also launched the Global Pandemic Alliance, which is an effort on a global level to support with data and with gathering knowledge to support existing solutions, initiatives on a global level.
Thank you, Amir. Professor Vanessa Evers from the NTU Institute for Science and Technology for Humanity.
Thanks, Suki. It's very exciting to be here today at this launch. I'm Vanessa Evers, Director of NIST, the Institute of Science and Technology for Humanity. It's a mouthful. This is really exciting for us to be part of this alliance because we are really focusing on bridging across the disciplines of the sciences, as well as working together with industry and government and non-governmental organizations and the public to really find ways to solve these challenges that we are facing. So NIST is really focusing on bringing in deep domain knowledge when it comes to the scientific and technological, but also how that crosses over to society and the humanities. So very exciting to be part of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Vanessa. Bradley, would you like to share a little bit about yourself, please, Bradley?
Sure. Thanks, Ziki. And thanks to SGInnovate for pulling all this together for this really important initiative. So I'm Bradley. I'm the director of the still relatively new Global Center for Tech Innovation and Sustainable Development for the UN Development Program based out of Singapore. Our mandate broadly is to, or the question we're trying to solve is how do we leverage tech and innovation to really accelerate sustainability, sustainable development in the developing world, or what folks that are on this webinar probably call emerging or frontier markets, I guess. As of late, we've been really focusing on sort of helping shape the UN's digital response and really focusing on our customers, our clients are the array of 160 country offices in the developing world. And we focused a lot of our attention on a potential silver lining of COVID-19, which is this acceleration of the digital revolution and digital transformation. But what I'm really interested in is how can we amplify the positive benefits of that for the developing world? Is it through, accelerating IoT-driven precision agriculture, not just in the US or in Malaysia or for urban agriculture in Singapore, but for rural parts of Africa? Or are there ways for us to accelerate telemedicine in rural parts of Africa, and so on and so on? So that's what we're trying to really focus on, and we're just so pleased to be able to do this with SGInnovate, and looking forward very much to this global challenge too that we're cooking up together. Thanks.
Thank you, Bradley. Always a joy working with the UNDP and the team. Last but certainly not least, Cecily Ng, who's the General Manager for Singapore for Salesforce.
Hello, good morning and good evening to everybody. Thank you to SGInnovate for having me. So I run the business basically for Singapore for Salesforce. And for those of you who are not familiar with Salesforce, Salesforce is a US-based enterprise software cloud technology company. So we provide a platform for companies to connect with their customers, employees, and wider stakeholders. So even though Salesforce is a commercial entity, we believe that business is actually a great platform for change. And we can bring the values into action and kind of change the world for the better. So really honored to share the virtual stage with fellow panelists, and look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Cecily. Well, to all of you who've joined us, we really would like for this session to be as interactive as possible. So we would love to address questions that you may have. To help us to facilitate that, please post your questions on the Q&A function box. And do vote for the questions that you would like for us to be answered, and we will get to that later during the session. And we've got about 160 folks who've joined today on this session. I'm always eager to know where our attendees are joining us from. Please let us know in the chat function which part of the world you are calling us from today. And with that, I want to thank the panelists for coming on board, the partnerships that we have here today. It is very pertinent because right now, globally, we are facing many challenges that we see with the current climate, with the pandemic, with the fast aging population that the world's facing, climate change, the need for alternate food, energy sources. That's just to name a few. And the reason why we're here today and launching this very important initiative is really because all of us as partners, we believe that deep tech has the potential to address many of these challenges and then really improve the human condition. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists to please, in your respective capacities, share with us how is it that you're putting your money where your mouth is in realizing or helping to further the potential of deep tech. Cecily, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. So Ziggy, I'm so happy that you brought up climate change. So I probably will first talk about what Salesforce is doing about it and why we are doing it. So Salesforce thinks that sustainability is really a global urgency, and everybody, including corporations, needs to play that part. And in order to create really a more sustainable future for all of us. And at Salesforce, we celebrated an important milestone back in 2017, which is we are net zero and carbon neutral cloud for all our customers. And in addition to reducing impact of the environment, Salesforce is also adopting the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals to help kind of shape the company's global strategy and technology innovations to be on our path to deliver a sustainable and low carbon future for all. And Salesforce, because we provide technology solutions, we have also developed a product called the Sustainability Cloud. So basically, it is a carbon accounting cloud that helps corporations analyze the carbon emissions coming from the energy usage and employee activities like travel. And it allows companies to get a 360-degree view on the environmental impact, and then we provide them the data to kind of make better decision making. And then the reason why Salesforce as a commercial entity is so kind of passionate about sustainability is that we know that even though, climate change affects everybody, but its impact is even more compounded in the world's poorest regions, and amplifying the inequality that we already have. And equality is a core value at Salesforce, where we're committed, kind of to harness our voice, in a corporate world and really amplify the message of urgency to fight climate change and to drive equality for all.
Thank you, Cecily. This is open to the panel, so please feel free to chime in. Anyone from the panel?
I find that very difficult without direction from you, Suki. Not sure, not sure it's my turn.
Keep it as interactive.
Next time, please point at one of us. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, this is very inspiring, Cecily, to hear from such an influential company like Salesforce. From the university perspective, I really wanted to answer it from the institute and maybe also at a personal level as a professor of AI and robotics. So maybe to start with the academic level, what we're trying to do is to say, okay, science is curiosity driven. The innovation is curiosity driven. An engineer wakes up in the morning and thinks, can I solve this? So we're saying, can we take these societal challenges as the problem of curiosity? And can we bring together unusual combinations of people that you normally don't see? So not just throw all the engineers and the scientists at it, but to say, okay, what happens when we add designers in the mix and we add ethicists and psychologists and social scientists? How do we come to understand this problem and the consequences for society? So putting our money where our mouth is. For instance, in COVID time, we've launched a call for proposals, and I'm hoping our alliance will allow these crossovers, research projects between industry and government and academia as well, where we say, okay, of course there are technological innovations needed to deal with COVID testing, etc. And of course there are scientific achievements needed to find a virus, find a vaccine to the virus. But we also need to understand the longer term consequences. What will it do to our children and their education over the longer run? What about the mental and psychological well-being of people that live in Singapore and go through these times and have to deal with probably recurring events like these? And we really need to understand how we can support people in the longer run, and what are the economical consequences and the global political consequences that we really need to have insight in. So bringing together deep technology specialists as well as people from humanities and social sciences and arts to really come to a deep understanding of those problems. And personally, as a scientist myself, as a scholar myself, I think this initiative is about taking responsibility, about us being responsible about deep technology. What does it mean as a government to be responsible when it comes to adopting deep technology? What does it mean as a company, and what does it mean as a scientist as well? For instance, for myself, where I look at social artificial intelligence and social robotics, there are so many questions around the future of work. You know, how will this impact work? How many workers will lose their jobs to this new deep technology? And I really try to focus my own research around projects to empower people in their jobs. So one example is a social robot that helps therapists to reach autistic children and help educate them and help them develop that wasn't possible before. So really empowering their profession and making their profession bigger, better, faster, and reaching people they couldn't before.
That's fantastic. I think, you know, with around responsible AI, it's such a big topic, right? And, you know, technology always moves ahead a lot faster than regulation. And I think that, you know, all of us here, when we are looking at AI, we're deploying AI, I think that's conversations that's important to have around ethical AI, around diversity, you know, data points, and does it have a good representation across the board? Because otherwise it becomes biased, right? So I think that's an important topic, and we have had several conversations around that from different, the different sessions that we've had, and also upcoming sessions that we will be having. That continues to be a very important conversation. Any other gentlemen would like to chime in?
I think what was said was very inspiring in terms of how we actually look at deep tech for good. Before I say what we do about this, I think it's interesting to ask the question, what we define by good. Is good social good? Is good for benefits for everyone? Is good for communities and society? And how we qualify and quantify good in a way that we can measure our common progress toward that good. Is good is about poverty or hunger, solving that while we have the framework of the SDGs. Is good is about protecting citizens in a city and community, how we can achieve that good together as a group. So I think finding a way to qualify and quantify good as a community effort, as a group effort, I think would be very important as part of the deep tech development. So now when it comes to deep tech, I think we talked about AI and the impact of AI and the limitations that AI may have today. But to be honest, AI today is mostly machine learning still, and we are learning the biases and the limitations that are created by deployment of machine learning tools. And we learn also that data is important, its provenance, its privacy, ethical biases are important. As we learn all of that, finding a way to share that knowledge more widely and to make sure that the solutions that are deployed through different deep technologies are converging to learn to get better about how to use them, how to have design protocols, I think is important. So I didn't mention too much about what XPRIZE does, but for those who don't know XPRIZE, we're a foundation that organizes grand challenges and multi-year competitions to help solve those challenges. So what we do about usage of technology for good is actually empowering everyone to have a chance at solving that problem. But when I say everyone, every challenges will be launched touches 160 countries. And while we don't know who is going to be the next solver, could be in any country, any age, any gender, any race, any social status, we try to give a chance to everyone to participate. So while we do hackathon and startup accelerations and innovation programs, finding a way to broadcast to the world about how to accelerate innovation for good is our mandate. So this is where we put our money. This is where we put our effort, is to create frameworks to empower everyone to participate, that we get a chance to answer that question. And if they do, they win. So that's a very simple narrative that we have. In terms of deep tech and how it impacts on this initiative, I think what you've started here is a continuity, and you're basically building on top of so many other efforts that have been going on in the past few years, whether they're UN level or organizations or private public structures. Having a chance to do this in Singapore is fundamental, because Singapore has shown in so many ways leadership in adoption of technology and caring about citizens. I think if this sandbox of innovation can be a model, I think that would be wonderful to jumpstart this initiative. And we're so happy to be part of this.
Thank you, Amir. I'll just move on if Bradley or Jonathan, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Yep.
Thanks, Siki. Maybe I'm following up Amir's point too. I mean, what I think we should be kind of galvanized, mobilized around is, the question about, what does good mean in deep tech for good? For me, it means really trying to bring the good to the toughest, most needy people, right? So not just good here in Singapore, but what does it mean to create deep tech for good in Sierra Leone, right? And Sierra Leone's an actual use case we're working on. The new chief innovation officer of the government of Sierra Leone's a young scientist who's deeply skilled in AI and robotics. And how can we work in a context like that? How can we help a context like that rapidly amplify the positive impacts of AI, whether it's for digital medicine, whether it's for rural agriculture? They don't have time or resources to build up a massive R&D infrastructure. They don't have the money to build an ecosystem or a new SGInnovate. But how can we, from sitting here within this ecosystem, help start to put that together? Is it through, discrete things like working with Intel to help bring AI there? Is it through a challenge to bring the best solutions for digital medicine and so forth? So these are the things that really interest me. How can we, with the minimal resources, maximize the deep tech for good in the toughest places, not just the easiest ones?
Yes, because good is all relative, right? I mean, I kind of bring it back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Yeah.
Like some countries, the very basic needs are what's most pressing.
That's right.
And I think, that is a conversation on its own that I think, can have a lot of depth and breadth around that. I don't think we'll get to an answer, but I think that, the important element is inclusivity. How do we be more inclusive? Whether it's diversity in perspectives, in needs. I think those are conversations that are also important to have. I will move on right now. I think just based on that, if I could ask Amir, going on your point when you talked about XPRIZE, right? And what it is that you're doing. A lot of times, at SGInnovate, we are always driving conversations. We work with founders to help them to build their startups, to look at solutions for pressing problems. But a lot of things, and Bradley, we've talked about this as well. How do we move this conversation to an action, to actually something actually happening? And so I find the XPRIZE model quite interesting. Amir, perhaps you could share with us.
Yeah.
When you talk about incentivizing the solution and the challenges that the world has, and how how your XPRIZE challenges, do they actually go towards solving solutions? Tell us a little bit about that. How, share with us the successes and areas that you could be improving on perhaps, and areas that we could learn from, Amir?
Thank you, Zaki. Yes, I'm excited to share that with everyone. We think about competitions and challenges as one way to put a big problem out there and talk about it. So conversations are important about understanding, about collaboration, about alignment. But when it comes to building solutions, solutions are very different from different perspectives. A solution for a health or mental health issue in Cape Town might not be the same way in Ho Chi Minh City or in Toronto. So when people receive that problem or think about it, the way they're going to be adopting framework to solve for it might be different. So in fact, what we do is that we don't focus on solutions. We focus on problems. And we try to define, if that problem was solved, how would the world will look like? And how do we know to measure the impact of that problem being solved? So we don't incentivize for the solution, we incentivize for the problem being fast forwarded. That way we leave complete autonomy in terms of how to approach problem solving. So it's more the approach of problem solving that matters than the solution itself. Because solutions that are sustainable will address a global need because of similarities of problems around the world. So you think about cybersecurity or protection of young children or health issues that are very similar. But because of realities, socio-economic realities, different geographical differences, different political differences, the way they're adopted, the way healthcare is distributed, that problem may take a different type of format. So in fact, global solutions are the ones that are answering the same global issues, and local solutions are the ones that are addressing immediate issues. So we're trying to incentivize for both and leave the community of solvers, whether they're entrepreneurs, they're a mom at home, or a city manager, or a policymaker, to think about, if I had to come up with an approach to make that problem go away, what would I do? And we incentivize for teams to work together. We incentivize for multidisciplinary teams to work together. For instance, if you're talking about education, well, we incentivize an entrepreneur, we incentivize a city activist, we incentivize educators, philosophers, psychologists, programmers, everyone to come together to think about how this curriculum problem can be solved at scale. So that at scale is the magic term. If we don't think at scale, we always think about very narrow niche problems. So while in fact, markets require product market fit for a product to meet its market, when we think about global challenges, we want to think about how this challenge is global and how it will scale at one point. And in fact, solutions never scale at the beginning. They take time to iterate. For instance, we have the chance to having Salesforce. Salesforce didn't become Salesforce day one. There is a path to that. So if we look at SDGs as a framework to separate problems into different buckets and use their indicators as a way to measure progress, we have adopted this framework for many, many years. So the story of XPRIZE started with going to space. How can space become the new place for entrepreneurs? Entrepreneurs build hardware, then they build software, they build apps, but our entrepreneurs are going to go and build something in space. Well, space is a protected area. So to go to space, you have to open up space. This is what we did 25 years ago. At one point, we need to understand the oceans. So we launched a challenge about understanding the oceans and think of it as a Google Maps for the oceans. How can we know 4 kilometers down everywhere in the world what oceans are about, composed and done? So the way we frame problems are not just narrow, we try to incentivize for a global answer, and that through that incentive, we get many teams, hundreds of teams trying to do their best to solve. A very good anecdote, we launched about 5-6 years ago, a challenge called Global Learning. And the Global Learning Challenge was to adopt AI and technology about education to help children that don't have access to schools or teachers to read and learn by themselves, going from full illiteracy to literacy in a short amount of time. And while we had multiple times, and we worked with UNESCO and the government of Tanzania and the World Food Program. Robert Dopp was in the intro video. He was also very instrumental in that prize and supporting us. We gave a chance to hundreds of teams to have a real sandbox. So we recruited about 2,700 children in Tanzania, and we asked teams to build that software, which is AI-based, in Swahili, to demonstrate that not only is international, is neutral, gender neutral, but also it can work in real life. And we give them access to 2,700 children for 9 months to test that software. The winners were 2 women from South Korea and a group in London. but we had teams from every country. And this field test was in Tanzania. So thinking about, when we talk about global challenges, think about the problems is bigger than all of us, and find a way to incentivize for all of us to have a look at it and to compete, but also share, because by creating knowledge, we empower everyone and make that knowledge available to everyone. So this is the approach that we take into really creating incentives, and incentives are the clear goal. So that's how we think about it, and it has been working. And really, the world needs global solutions, and there are not one single way to do it, but we're basically one of the companies that do that.
Absolutely, Amir. I think, and I always say this, right? It's really a sum of all parts. Every single one of us is doing our own little part, right? And not one of us alone will be solving this issue, exactly, because it's too big an issue. But it's really the sum of all parts that brings it together. I want to bring that discussion now to the role of government. And Jonathan, I'd like to ask your perspective here. You know, with all these things that XPRIZE is doing, that we're doing, you know, from the startup level, the ecosystem level, what is the role of governments? And in your work with bodies such as UN and SGAT, how do these public, non-profit, I guess, you know, organizations like UNESCO, what is the role in encouraging entrepreneurship, supporting an ecosystem of social innovation, and enabling the development of startups to become investable and looking to solve these big problems? Jonathan?
Sure. That's a big question for this time of the morning, but I will give it a go. I suppose, actually, I mean, let's start with the obvious point. I think to many, kind of government and innovation is somewhat of an oxymoron. They're not two words that you would intuitively put together when you speak about technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. But I think, I mean, as being widely documented, what I think is really interesting about, if you like, past industrial revolutions and indeed the past digital revolution are things like, I mean, the internet, GPS, everything that was in our phone today was actually instigated by government, albeit by the likes of DARPA for defense purposes. But many of these technologies were government led. What I think is really interesting about the fourth industrial revolution and many of the deep technologies that have been developed, it's very much private sector led. If you look at all the investments going into AI, this time round, it's not the governments doing this. It's really the big companies. And for me, this question of responsibility really does come into play. And I mean, just on your initial question around money where your mouth, from a personal experience, what I truly believe in the power of the private sector as a force for good. I mean, my father is from Shenzhen, so I saw Shenzhen go from a fishing town to being the Silicon Valley of Asia, as some call it right now, in the space of 30 years. At the same time, I'm from a place in the UK which is always consistently ranked as the worst place in the UK to live. The highest rates of poverty, the highest rates of unemployment. Now that wasn't the case when I was younger. It was a very rich fishing port with a thriving private sector. But now it's a city that's been ravaged. So I've seen kind of the role of the private sector play good and bad. And I think beyond doubt, technology and indeed private sector technology has been and is now the driving force behind economic growth. It's put money in people's pockets, it's pulled people out of poverty. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves the question, has it been good for society? I mean, income inequalities are at the highest they've ever been. Has it been good? Have the industrial revolutions been good for the environment? Very, very debatable, as carbon dioxide emissions have risen in step with the industrial revolutions. So back to your question on what is the role of government. And it's indeed why I came to work for the UN. I'm relatively new to the UN. I spent most of my life working in BC. Was that I actually believe that governments did have a big role to play in this on this agenda. And it's interesting that essentially my role is, and you asked about the role of SCAP, I advise governments on technology policy. And whenever I meet with a senior government official from country X or a minister, I ask the same question. I say, why are you interested in technology innovation? 80% of the time, the answer is the same: economic growth and jobs. Absolutely, which is perfectly understandable. But I think, as Bradley mentioned, and several of the panelists have mentioned, the SDGs are three-dimensional in nature. They have it's people, planet, prosperity. it's economy, society, and environment. A lot of my work and where I dedicate my work to is actually how do you align government policies to address those 3 dimensions? It shouldn't just be about the economy. It should be about solving societal issues and solving environmental issues. So certainly a big piece of my work is around actually how do we, if you like, redefine technology policy to address those 3 dimensions, and that's a big part of my work. On your second question around entrepreneurship and startups and how we how governments can support them to address these challenges, I think actually Asia is one of the most innovative countries in the world in terms of government policy around supporting social innovation and entrepreneurship. And I'll give you examples. I mean, in the country where I live, we supported the government to develop the Social Enterprise Act. Now, this is a government policy that gives enterprises who have an ingrained social mission, who are looking to make money, fine, specific benefits, specific tax reliefs, etc., in order to incentivize entrepreneurs to actually, if you like, do good as well as do well. And when I went to business school, I learned how to make money. Simple as that. I think in business schools now, thankfully, things have moved on. And I think certainly government incentives can be put in place to do that. I was reading one of the chat questions, and they were talking about, one of the questions was around how can companies that actually look at the base of the pyramid as a market be encouraged to do so, given that it may take 10, 20 years to become profitable. And I think that's a really interesting question as well. Again, you look at the Philippines, world first inclusive business accreditation scheme. So an inclusive business is, as many of you know, a business that actually targets the very poorest people as a market for their products and services. And in the Philippines, they have legislation which actually provides 5 to 10 year tax reliefs for companies who are willing to take on that challenge. And I think that's the power of government policy in a way. You can provide those right incentives. And indeed, with initiatives like SGInnovate, I know you kind of have a foot within government and outside of government, but I think certainly government policy has a role to play in directing technology towards a specific broad agenda. And I know SGInnovate's mandate is around inclusivity. It's around the societal benefits. And I think certainly governments can play a role in actually setting the direction of that, not just towards economic growth, but towards these social environmental challenges as well. I'll kind of stop there, otherwise I will just ramble on about this all day.
You know, you brought up so many points, Jonathan, that I want to get into a lot further and deeper, but we only have that much time. But maybe one of the things as a segue to the next question for Bradley is around the SDGs. Well, deep tech can really provide solutions to many of the problems that are outlined in the SDGs. But I want to ask Bradley, in what you've been doing, you know, are there certain SDGs that are easier to reach than others? Is there a difference in priorities, and how do you address that between nations, between developed and developing nations? Bradley?
Yep, taking myself off mute. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think going back to a point Jonathan made, I mean, I think it's really better to think of it really holistically, right? And well, you know, they're all interconnected. It's sort of a, you know, a global to-do list for the planet. And all stakeholders have a role to play in them. There's some that are sort of, let's say, more obvious and more urgent and more compelling, maybe. For example, absolute hunger or absolute poverty, right? That we really need to focus on. But they're all important. And each country, each community, each individual needs to make choices to contribute to them, right? And probably the most important work that the UN does on a daily basis is help governments, or let's say one of the most important things they do, besides the humanitarian relief work, for example, in the middle of wars and conflicts, but for me at least. But one of the most important is you know, help shaping governments' national response to the SDGs and the action plan to them. But I'm sort of thinking back on this question about, you know, you asked what governments can do to help. I mean, help drive, let's just even more broadly, technology for good. and Jonathan gave some provocative answers, but there's a whole ecosystem there. Just the same for the SDGs, right? Like there's so many constituent pieces here. Like governments can help build the ecosystems, these pre-competitive approaches. They also help set norms and guidance, ethics and trust frameworks. Super important for AI, right? Investors demanding evidence for alignment of SDGs through data and reporting. And citizens are hugely important. I mean, not just the Greta Thunbergs, but everyone. I mean, you know, be educated on the power of technology and then use that digital tech, not just social media, to drive change yourselves. And then that kind of leaves what the UN and NGOs. So what's their role in all this? Convening, amplifying, tech transfer. To some extent, but it's also, I think there's a role to play with norms and guidance too, right? At a global level for some of these digital finance frameworks, for example, or around AI. What's interesting to me is some of the work that Singapore is already doing on its own, kind of spontaneously, to help drive the global discussion on trust frameworks around AI for fintech and just finance, right? Because it's not being done, comprehensively enough anywhere else, and it's in Singapore's interest and it's the world's interest. But what role should international organizations, global organizations, play in this? And this is where I think the UN, frankly, is a little bit, slow in the uptake. We should be more engaged. Maybe we're trying, but yeah. I don't know, some of my thoughts on how to, on the broader sort of ecosystem and all the different players here, and how to push technology to drive sustainability.
Yeah, I think again, it's not one single entity is going to be able to solve this, right? We all need to be working together. And that's why the theme around partnership with the future is important, right? It's, across the ecosystem. And the role of corporates, and maybe that's, I want to bring that conversation to Cicely. The role of corporates, I mean, I've been in corporate before, and we always know is the quarterly cycle where we need to, be announcing financials to analysts. How do you balance that? I was interested to hear about, the priorities of Salesforce in wanting to deploy tech for good, but in reality, corporates are run by financiers, right? And by our CFOs. How do you balance that?
Yeah, well, thank you, Siki. It's funny that you talk about financial because, today is actually the last day of the month, and my phone has been going crazy for the past hours. I think a lot of my bosses trying to call me. But, I think, after all this kind of, financials results that we have to deliver as a public company, there is a North Star to the company. So I'll first talk about kind of that part, and then I'll go to the topic which I'm really passionate about, is women in leadership and women in tech. I do believe that it is possible for a corporation to do well and do good at the same time. And Salesforce, I'm really, proud to work for a company for 10 years, is that Salesforce has built values right into the company. So for example, when the company started, which is very, very small, a startup, that we have built in this 1-1-1 model, which is a philanthropic model, that no matter how big or how small we'll get to as a company, we will always give back, 1% of employees' time and 1% of our product and 1% of our equity back to nonprofit. And it's really easy to do when you are very small. But now we are, 16 billion plus, and we're still doing it. And I think this is important to do it right from the beginning. And, the impact really multiplies. So for example, Salesforce has been in Singapore for about 16 years now. And over the time we have, done, almost more than a year, man-year worth of 10 man-years worth of volunteering and about $1 million giving back to the community. And then of course, we are a provider of technology, right? Big corporation. And Jonathan, I think you rightly talk about that, how do you make sure that you become a force for good? And when we develop technology, we are also very conscious that, we follow that North Star that we have set in place. And so in terms of artificial intelligence, that product development is under the great leadership of Richard Socher, our chief scientist, who really, run a team of researchers to develop capabilities, really smart people who come up with the next generation of capabilities. But he also has a person in his team that has a very, very unique role. Her name is Kathy Baxter. So her job is actually her official job title is she's an ethical AI architect. And I think she also spoke at the SGInnovate in Jan this year. And so what she does is really to help, guide conversations across, everybody in Richard Socher's team to make sure that, whatever product we develop follows a ethical framework, and on a broader term as a company, we have also, not just artificial intelligence, but in general, how do we make sure all the Salesforce technologies are being used for good? Is that we have a Office of Ethical and Humane Use that, is set up end of 2018. We didn't have that role before, but we realized the need. And Paula Goldman, who I think you mentioned at the beginning of the session, that she leads that team and she works alongside, our product development team to make sure that, we as a company follows kind of the value. And just very recently, she released a set of ethical and, privacy guidelines to for our customers to how to use, when data for the COVID-19 response. And I believe, really a company is important that we do good for kind of, we report good results to Wall Street, but we also do good as a company. Now onto the second part of the question, which is, women in tech. And I mentioned earlier on that, the 1-1-1 model actually allows all of us to give back to causes that we're passionate about. And then for myself, I'm really passionate about kind of bringing women up. We always say that one arm you pull yourself up and then the other arm you pull someone else with you. So this year I'm participating in a mentorship program, actually in partnership with IMDA and SG Women in Tech, where I'm mentoring about 12 females across 3 companies on various topics. And I think one thing that came out, very prominent in the mentoring session is that there's a lack of role models in the tech companies where they can look up to, where you can, balance your personal life. It's, you can do well as a female and you don't have to just limit it to deep technical skills to do well in the tech field for women. And so representation really matters. And I'm so glad to see in the panel today, I think, Dr. Professor Evans and yourself, Zuki, is really good example where, female who excel can be very successful in the world of tech. And so I think we continue the conversation. So, but I strongly believe that the world will be a better place if, more women are in charge.
Here. I cannot disagree more. Thank you for that. Hey, I want to bring the discussion upstream a little bit to Professor Vanessa on the role of scientists and scholars in helping to build deep tech, in providing solutions for society. I want to get your perspective, Vanessa, as we look at, because scholars, academia are looking at it from the research perspective, right? As SGInnovate, we also help researchers to commercialize their research into companies. How do you give us a perspective in terms of what you feel the role of scientists and scholars in being able to drive deep tech to provide solutions for society?
Thanks, Suki. Yeah, I'll try. I'm still full in my head thinking about everything that was just said in the last question. I'll try to tie that together a bit. I don't want to be controversial in this panel, but I'm unsure if maybe this is maybe more a personal thought on this topic. Is that there seems to be this kind of tension felt between government versus private sector, and then I guess I'm moving academics under government for some weird reason, but I'm unsure if I feel similar about this, and I'm also unsure how many of my colleagues will support me in this notion. But I think there are many reports around return on investment. And I think after many of these reports, it's very clear that return on investment is often huge when you invest in academia. When you invest in universities doing research, it's kind of known that it has a good return on investment. There's this big report from some banks in Europe that came out recently where they said, you know, stick like 75%, 60, 75% in academia for you know, innovation. But the thing is that just throwing out all this innovation doesn't help it land in society. So you have to invest in entrepreneurship. You have to invest in startups to be able to translate all of these new innovations, all these new scientific results to society. So I'm thinking translation is kind of the key word for us as an alliance here, where we say, okay, there are these innovations in science and in technology. They have to be translated to be able to fit all the problems that society is facing and people are facing and companies are facing. So these entrepreneurs, startups, they have an essential role of translation before we can reap the benefits of these innovations. And then I think Bradley and Cecily and Jonathan also addressed this. There's this element of responsibility in this translation, because, you know, are we solely profit driven? This is also a discussion that's happening in the chat. Profit driven is, of course, profit is important, but there is a value-based system. I think Bradley mentioned that we need to address, and that the government might play a role in, but that really we all play a role in. I guess I'm a little bit worried about saying, all right, you know, just give the academics the job to fix stuff and find solutions to clear problems, because a lot of academia hangs on academic freedom. And it's been proven over and over that academic freedom is essential to get the best science, the best innovation. On the other hand, it's of course meaningful and makes sense that the government says, yeah, I'm just not just going to pump money into university nilly-willy. I need to see that the results impact society. And I think we see this discussion in Singapore, where the Singaporean government says, you know, we want to have impact on Singapore society. We want to see how this science and technology benefits the Singaporeans, and rightly so. And here I think is where it's difficult, where we need a discussion with each other, where we say, okay, innovation, science is a global thing. It's produced, knowledge is produced globally. So it's not a thing you can do by yourself, which has also been mentioned before. But is it necessary to, say, compete at this top level? Do we need to pump so much money into science and technology and engineering to compete at this super kind of X-Prize excellence level of science and technology? And I think there again is kind of tricky. On the one hand, I think it's fair that the government says, look, I want you to focus on these problems because we need them solved. On the other hand, we know how important academic freedom is. So there is some combining to do there, where I'm hoping an alliance like this could also provide some guidance.
I think it's a balance, isn't it, Vanessa? I think that the research as a basis, science as a basic foundation for research in looking at some of these problems and how they can be addressed, and needing an X-Prize, for example, to look at incentivizing problem solving by bringing together some of the entrepreneurs and solution architects to build.
Right. Yeah, I think translation is key. I happen to also be part of an X-Prize challenge, the Avatar X-Prize challenge that I'm also working on. It's about the humans and machines and crossing all those boundaries that are there is very exciting. And I think translation here is, again, you know, super key to be able to translate all these sciences to society. And to do that, you have to perform at the top level. As a country, Singapore, you have to perform at the top level in science and technology to be able to make the translation from this global knowledge to the Singaporean society.
Well, thanks. Hey, I want to get to some of these questions. I see that there's a lot of engagement on our Q&A session. We've got about 160 I saw at peak attendees that are here today, and a lot of lively discussion on our Q&A function. I want to ask the panel this. There's some discussion around, is there a need for additional incentivization? I guess maybe, Amir, you could help to kind of address that with incentivizing for solution solving. Is there a need to do more? Because it seems that there's some comment that, you know, companies are looking at very trivial problems to solve as opposed to the important pressing ones on SDGs. How do we make that more compelling for people to be looking at the more urgent issues that need to be solved? Amir, perhaps you could share with us, as you look at some of the challenges that you are developing that XPRIZE does, how do you go about doing that? Is it looking at SDGs as a foundation, or is it looking at demand from corporates? What is the thought process behind that?
Thank you, Saki. That's a good question. We do both. We look at the SDGs as a framework because there are a number of indicators that help with measurement and qualify metrics and advancement. We work with governments and UN agencies because they have foot on the ground in many countries, so they can help disseminate those problems and bring and not being innovators. But we do work a lot, as Professor Evers said, with academia, because the translation of science to technology is not the same thing as translating technology to solutions. And then in the mix, you have basically investment bodies and organizations that are either foundations or corporate ventures that are looking for repeatable solutions that could create value. So the alignment of these values between policymakers, let me just backtrack for 1 second. The biggest investment is coming from governments, not venture capital, not corporations. So once we identify pathways for sustainable solutions, government will invest. The same way invest in schools, into roads, into telecom towers, into healthcare programs and so forth. If we can figure out a way to create a line and a flow between research and technology and deployment by organizations and corporations that create value, and how government can sustain and support bigger problems, then I think we have a path to address bigger problems. And SDG is a very nice framework, but we can use other frameworks. For instance, at XPRIZE, we have a 3-pillar approach. One pillar is stewardship of Earth and people, how we can help with climate, with access to clean air, to save the oceans and so forth. The second pillar is equity. How I can give everybody a chance to have access to education, everybody a chance to have access to healthcare, to have freedom of speech and all the above. And the third pillar is exploration. Explore farther, explore planets, explore our mind, explore the relationship between humans and machines, right? This exploration is what pushes us forward. The SDGs are basically the legacy that we have created that we have to solve for to go further. So we connect the dots by having a 3-party pillar. And I think this is, the magic is when we can connect the dot between research, which has this freedom, as Professor Evers said, and when we launch prizes, we give total freedom to the teams too. We don't tell them what to do. We just tell them, this is the pole position. If you can solve for that, we just give you some general guidelines. So if governments and corporations could find a way to align and create more freedom about problem solving, I think we can make some progress there.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, just on the point around kind of incentives for solution solving. Incentives always help, you know, especially when your incentives may be slightly different. And I always say, previously I worked in venture capital where my ultimate objective was my bonus, and I'll be quite honest about that. That was how I was measured in pure financial terms. So I think incentives help, and I mentioned earlier incentives that governments have put in place to create more social forms of enterprise and encourage younger people to be social entrepreneurs, not just entrepreneurs, but by giving them certain aspirations, support, etc. But I think the second thing I would say is sometimes you just need, from the private sector perspective, you need certainty. And I give the example of, say, COVID right now, around actually, why should a big pharma company invest billions of billions into a COVID vaccine? Now, what would encourage innovation there? What's interesting they would need to know that they could recoup some of their investment. I think it's a point. And you're seeing really interesting things now, like advanced market commitments being implemented for COVID-19 vaccines, which were previously implemented by Gavi to develop pneumonia vaccines in some of the very poorest countries, which essentially we're saying to the private sector, you develop a vaccine of this quality, here's the price and volume we will pay. Now again, limited risk on the donor government side because you're not investing any money up front, but definitely incentive and certainty there from the private sector side. I think as well, certainty can be given for solution solving in terms of really clear government policy. So I'll give two examples. In the UK, where I'm from, the government has said by 2030, only electric cars will be allowed in the UK. Clear policy. That will catalyze innovation like you've never seen it before in the UK. In so many different ways. You look at Fiji, who were one of the first countries to come out and said, okay, we're going to ban single-use plastics in our economy. Again, it's not an incentive for social problem solving, but it's a clear direction and a certain policy position by government, which will again, I'm sure, will uncover and enable and scale all sorts of innovations around kind of alternatives to single-use plastics. So yeah, incentives help, but kind of certainty around government direction is also very beneficial.
Hey, thank you for that. And I think leading me to another question that I see that's got a very strong upvote. So I think we should answer that. It's a big question, but I think we have to get, I'd like to get perspectives from the panel. How do we build commitment from various stakeholders to stay in the long game, looking at it long term, because a lot of these issues take a long time to solve, right? And we talked a little bit about from the corporate perspective, we are driven by the quarterly numbers. It's great that corporates are looking at sustainability as a key factor, but in reality, how do we practically build commitment from the different stakeholders to ensure that there is that long strategic view in mind and not just short-term view? Cicely, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I actually see the question I'm thinking, because when Salesforce started, we were there to disrupt the market. So we were trying to do something that nobody has done, right? At that time, cloud wasn't mainstream, and we were a disruptor. And actually, we didn't know whether we will be successful or not. But we were. But I think we were successful because we are very focused on our customers, right? That if our customers using our technology are successful, then we are successful. And that kind of build kind of the business model. And because it's subscription model, it kind of enable us to have that, I would say the longevity, and it is a business model that, Wall Street also likes. That's why, you see the valuation of kind of the share price is reflected in our earnings. I think it's a tough question, how to build commitment in various stakeholders. I think it does start from the top, and with a kind of clear alignment from the top that, what does the company stand for? What is important for, what is the key values of the company, and, what is important, and it's reflected in the business plan, right? It's not just, talk, but how do you actually execute it, and how do you measure that you're actually achieving those? So I think that will be a great place to start.
Any other inputs? Thank you, Cecily. Any other inputs from anyone? I would give a perspective. I think absolutely the role of government is important in setting direction, in setting priorities, in setting setting aside resourcing, right, or prioritizing resources. But it's also our own individual roles, right? In the little things that we do. There were some questions around plastic. How are we as nations? The whole issue around plastic, the problems on plastic is so pressing. How do governments come together to address these issues? Bradley, we've talked about this before. Do we want to do a challenge around plastics, reducing plastics? But what about us as individuals, right? We can't keep waiting for governments and regulations to happen before we ourselves take our own action. And it really counts. If every single one of us just reduce our plastics, like, by a little bit, it does add up. Will it solve the problem completely? No, it won't. But I think, we must never negate the power of the individual, how our own actions can lead to a bigger outcome. And so I guess I would ask that, for every single one of us, we have to look at ourselves and our own behavior. I mean, in my own household as well, right, with my kids and how we go around single-use plastic, single-use paper products or whatever. I think those are things that we can do on an individual level that can really add up. But I want to get perspectives from others. How can we build commitment from different stakeholders to stay the long game?
I'll just make two very quick points. I think that I work for the UN, so I would say this. I think something like the SDGs give you that longer commitment that go beyond many of the quarterly financial figures that corporates sometimes have to adhere to, and indeed political cycles that many governments adhere to. So quick plug for the SDGs. But I think it's a really interesting point that this point around commitment and taking a long-term view. And I've done a lot of work in impact investing, and that's a big community I work in. And I always say to the community, I say, history will tell that we were some of the forefathers and mothers of the impact investing movement. I feel we're that early. Now, actually, I think this holds true to the deep tech community as well. History will tell that all of us on this call today who are interested in this were there when this baby was like two weeks old. I really do believe we are at that stage in terms of the opportunities and potential that deep tech could have for economy, society, environment. So I think we have to be humble in where we are in that timescale. And actually, to the point around long-termism, then be realistic around what some of the objectives of, certainly within my lifetime, my ambitions are. And in my lifetime, it may not be coming up with deep tech solutions that will scale to billions of people and impact billions of people. It may be, within my lifetime, just being able to ask the right questions. And this is what I mean. I think we have to be kind of place ourselves within that timeline, be realistic, but of course ambitious around what our objectives could be. But by doing that, it will help us develop this longer game and not become so impatient around why hasn't AI, I don't know, lifted 2 billion people out of poverty, and kind of come up with these very unrealistic ambitions. So I think certainly a sense of kind of placement of ourselves in the continuum of this and the evolution is certainly something we should reflect upon, that I don't think the community reflects upon enough, actually.
Well, thank you. Very, very deep insight there, Jonathan. Thank you for that. I think there were some questions. I think that it's great that we've got this community here in wanting to, believing in this cause and asking how to get involved. I think there are various ways. First of all, reach out to each one of us here on the SGInnovate website, join the community, share with us which are the areas that you could be helping in, whether it is sharing your own expertise on panels like this, getting involved in challenges that we're doing with some of our partners, and there are many ways that we could be looking to contribute to this cause, sharing some of the problems that you're seeing on the ground that could be addressed potentially, because it's all about discussion. And I think that some of these discussions bring up very important points for us to be able to be looking at and addressing. I do want to get to a question specifically for, I'm trying to pull that up now, for Professor Vanessa, around the role of, around translation.
Oh, I may have answered it online and it's moved to the answered section.
Ah, okay. You want to address, because I thought a good question around, like, what you're doing in your role.
Yeah, I think this was the question around the crossover with humanities and social sciences. Is that right, Suki?
That's right.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, rightly so. One member in the audience said, well, how does this work for, say, humanities, people working in humanities, social sciences, etc. And I think we tend to see humanities, social sciences arts as something that happens at universities, but really doesn't. Happens in a lot of non-governmental organizations, a lot of entrepreneurship companies, etc. And indeed, this is from the purpose of, from the perspective of NIST, like super important that we say, okay, if we have a problem, we don't just throw all our engineers at it. We really need to understand the longer term consequences for society. How will this change the way people grow up, behave, live their lives, and what will the longer term impact be on the environment? And therefore you really need a very broad perspective, bring people in that look at the world from different glasses and work together, which is also something that the X Prize is all about, something that of course the United Nations tries to deal with their problems in that way. So yeah, I would want to stress that point, really finding these bridges across from science and technology to humanities, to the social sciences, to the arts, to work together on these important challenges.
And I think, you know, with SGInnovate, we're also looking to work with scientists and researchers to see how we could translate that and make that, you know, into commercializing some of the research and building companies from that as well. I want to talk about, so there was a question here around economic models. And Jonathan, I want to ask you on that. When you look at some of these models, the VC models, how can that be improved? There's a suggestion that, you know, the traditional VC model is not working so well in terms of commercializing tech for good. Do you have a perspective on that, Jonathan, or anyone else from the panel?
Well, I think VC was very successful in what it aimed to do. I always say, if you like, VC was born from the need for technology startups to get capital. That's kind of where it came from, and it's been very successful. If you look at some of the tech giants that have spawned from the likes of Silicon Valley today, they're incredibly successful and impact our lives every day. Now, however, to the second question, do I think the model is fit for kind of startups in the world as we know it today? I would say probably not, given the context of the SDGs that the countries have signed up to. And I'll go back to the point around the SDGs are three-dimensional focus. It has to be economic, social, and environmental objectives that underpin every government policy, every corporate policy, every startup policy. In my mind, that is if you like, the evolution and thought we will need to get the revolution and impact that we can get from our economies. There's no question around that. And I think if there's anything that COVID has proven, is that there is absolutely that social and economic objectives are inherently intertwined. You know, with lockdown, as an example, you're looking, okay, lockdown, affect the economy, save lives. Don't lock down, help the economy, put lives at threat. They're one in the same now. And I think as we aim to, as the term that's been used a lot, to build back better, there is a real opportunity for both governments and the private sector, and indeed all parties, to actually think about what that means, and actually how a different economic model can be put in place that does have a positive impact on society, that does create jobs and stimulate economic growth as well. Because as the point I mentioned previously, COVID has just really kind of accentuated the fact that these things are so intertwined and interlinked.
Thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts on this?
Bradley has.
Yeah, I think I do. Thanks, Tiki. So maybe back just a couple of quick stories or points on this point of commitment and more broadly to sustainability in a couple of different fields, right? So one story I always tell is about what's happening with sustainable finance and you know, ESG investing in Japan, and how do they move the needle there? How are they starting to move the needle? Well, so there's the Japan Pension Fund, which is, I think it's the world's largest pool of capital, right? It's $1.7 trillion. And the chief investment officer there, you know, took quite a bit of time, but managed to convince his stakeholders, board members, investors, that he wants to align this massive pool of money towards ESG metrics, getting closer to kind of SDG metrics. And in the end, it wasn't such a big push because the whole thing, you know, if you're managing a pension fund, it's about long-termism. It's around committing to a future that you want, right? And so that's how he sold it to the nation of Japan. And you know, from that moving the needle, all these other financial institutions are steadily starting to come on board when they see this credible, you know, one of the biggest pools of money. But so there's that on the financial side, but then also you've got consumers, right? And we talked about citizens earlier. You know, this is the Gen Z generation, you know, apparently, reportedly is, you know, sort of the first that we've recorded that are making the biggest decisions in their lives, like around what jobs they take, what things they buy, what food they eat, based on essentially SDG linked ethics and, you know, and frameworks, right? Like, is this job good for the planet? Does it help sustainability? So it's happening in that kind of way, right? And then to the question of, you know, deep tech takes a long time. How do we stay committed to it? It does, to build a whole ecosystem and industry in a certain country, but what's so magic about the potential of deep tech is that we can apply deep tech from here anywhere, right? Like, I was talking to Professor Dean Ho, who's set up this Identify, right, using AI to help figure out the right variants of drugs for COVID, right, treatments for COVID. And you know, what used to take years and years and years, you can do like in a matter of minutes. All you need is data. So I posed to him the question, like, what about a new virus pops up in Sierra Leone, right? And you need to work out the right treatment for that. What does that take? How can you do something like that in Sierra Leone? He said, look, we've done something like that in an airport between flights. You know, just with my PC with data, right? So the application of some of these things is really transformative, right? You know, of course, including all the ethics frameworks that you need to think about and broader implications to society that Professor Evers is mentioning. But so there are real opportunities here, I guess, to leap at.
Thank you, Bradley. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the potential of deep tech for the greater good, not just in increasing corporate bottom lines, but, you know, the bigger priorities around, you know, solving some of the SDGs, around some of the big issues that the world's facing, because all these issues, they really have no borders, right? Some of them, as we've seen from the pandemic. So it's really for the greater good. And with that, you know, we've had such a great session, and it's been such an exciting journey for us, SGInnovate, together with some of the partners here in launching this initiative. And I'm so heartened to see that there are many who've attended who are very eager to be part of this process, to be contributing. So please join our community. Join us on deeptechforgood.com and also sginnovate.com. And we will be sending out an email to all participants. There will be a live record. There will be a recording of this session. Many of you have asked whether there's going to be a recording. There will be a recording on this session. So that we'll be posting on our YouTube channel. But perhaps in closing, I would like to ask each of the panelists to give your closing thoughts. What are some of the takeaways that the audience can reflect on in helping to further this initiative of Deep Tech for Good? What can we do in our own individual capacities, right, as we walk away today to help further this cause? And I'll start with Vanessa, please.
Oh dear, pressure. I thought this was a really wonderful discussion. I've learned so much from each of the panelists, so thank you so much. I would love to speak more with you and learn from you more. My own takeaway is a little bit that we seem to revolve around the ethics of the questions around deep technology and applying deep technology to try and solve these larger problems in society. And then especially, and I think Bradley's made this very clear to me, that you've got ethics, which are kind of the rules, but then you have morality, which is, are you willing to follow these rules? What is your choice to follow these rules? And sure, government and alliances and companies, you can set up as many ethics as you want, but there is an issue of a position to take, a morality behind it. And that's something that we have to build like a culture together. And that will be my main takeaway. If we can build that community, build that culture together, across all these things that divide us, whether that's corporate, financial, academia, whatever, cultural lines, that would be really wonderful.
Thank you, Vanessa. Amir, parting thoughts, please.
I'm really glad that this initiative is starting today, and also, like Vanessa, I learned a lot from all the panelists and all the good questions. I think a parting thought would be to think how we can align our incentives, how we can connect the dots, because it's not just about data or tech or good. It's about how was said, Jonathan mentioned that too, everything is intertwined. So finding a way through our collective effort to have alignment and leadership would be what I think we could focus on.
Thank you, Amir. Very important points. Cecily?
Yeah, really good discussion, really enjoyed it. I think the whole kind of COVID actually accelerate a lot of the kind of topics that we discussed than before. And even though I think there were a lot of concern on, technology, for bad, kind of the negative things, that bad things can happen. But I think we also have to focus on that, technology can, really help and can be for good. And I will take that optimistic view into the future that, focus on the good.
Absolutely. I'm an eternal optimist. We certainly must have a lens that, things can be addressed. Makes life a bit more livable that way, doesn't it? Jonathan, please.
I'm also an eternal optimist, but incredibly risk averse, which is bizarre given my job title and my past work. But on that point, I always take solace in safety, take assurances from safety in numbers. And my key takeaway from this would be just looking at the partners on this call and this initiative. We have people from the private sector, academia, foundations, multilateral organizations, all coming together. And I think certainly to move this deep tech for good agenda forward, we'll take that collective intelligence and open innovation approach. And yeah, just really look forward to kind of working with you all further. And for everyone who's on the call, please join as well, because it's safer in numbers, as I mentioned. Thank you.
Bradley.
A couple, I guess. One is just a great community of folks that have joined us and asked a lot of great questions. I think there's a lot of demand to make sure that we make available the Q&A transcript, I guess, which means that I think with just the group that's here, and not just I'm meeting the panelists, but with everybody who's joined us, we can really get something serious done. And so my bias is to have us very soon commit to real concrete, actionable, plans. One, and you've mentioned several of them already, and one would be this global challenge that we're going to do on the circular economy. But let's think about it of a couple maybe quicker wins and a couple of use cases. Maybe we could take a couple of potential technologies in a couple of countries or contexts and actually work through them with some of our friends and partners around the world, and get this moving and scaling as quickly as we can.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a wonderful session. I thank the panelists and our partners for walking this journey with us. And I thank all the attendees who've joined from New Zealand, San Diego, all across Asia. I know I'm missing some other countries, but thank you all for joining. And I think that this really is a collective effort. This initiative was born out of the necessity of partnerships for us to be able to achieve the end goal of solving some of these issues. We cannot do it alone, and I always say it is the sum of all parts. So let us now leave and reflect on what it is that we can do on an individual level. But do join the community, because this is where it starts. The conversations are important for us to lead to some form of action. And as we run these events at SGInnovate, I'm always very eager to get the feedback from the audience on how we can improve things that you liked about it. So as you leave Zoom, you will be asked to fill out a feedback form. I would most appreciate it if you guys could please help us to fill that out. Tell us what are the things that you want us to be talking about. And we certainly will try to bring that to you. And join us across our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Connect with us here, the panelists, and we would love to grow this community even bigger so that we can do more things together. And with that, thank you to the panelists. Appreciate all your time, and I'm looking forward to the great partnership ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.